The ground did not just tremble, it buckled under the force of the gale. Pip pressed himself deeper into the hollow beneath the mossy rock, his paws pulled tight against his chest. Every strike of thunder felt like a hammer blow against the earth, sending tremors through his bones. Above, the forest canopy was a chaotic blur of thrashing leaves and snapping twigs. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, but the sound was impossible to block out. It was a rhythmic, guttural roar that seemed to target his very hiding spot. He breathed in sharp, shallow bursts, his lungs tight with the effort of staying still. Outside the shelter, the wind screamed through the trunks, tearing at the very foundation of the woods. He felt the damp, cold soil pressing against his back, a meager barrier against the fury beyond the stone. The world had shrunk to this single, shaking space. He was small, isolated, and pinned down by a sky that had turned a violent, bruised purple. He did not move, he did not look out, he only waited for the next shock, his heart hammering against his ribs in time with the rolling thunder. A blinding white flash tore across the sky, turning the dark woods into a stark, skeletal landscape for a fraction of a second. Before the light faded, a deafening crack split the air louder than any thunder before it. A nearby birch tree shuddered, its top half snapping like a dry twig under the sudden, concentrated heat of the strike. The impact sent a jolt through the ground that vibrated up through the rock shielding Pip. High above, the canopy lost its grip. A robin's nest, woven tight with twigs and dried grass, broke free from the swaying branches. It plummeted through the layers of leaves, spinning wildly as it descended. It hit the wet earth with a dull, heavy thud, spraying mud in every direction. The structure disintegrated upon impact, spilling its contents into the dirt. Pip watched from his hollow as the broken debris skidded across the ground. The mother robin dived from the clouds, her wings beating against the gale in a desperate, frantic rhythm. She circled the wreckage, her cries lost beneath the roar of the wind. Pip stared at the ruin, his muscles locking tight as the reality of the scene took hold. The disaster was no longer a distant threat. It was right in front of him. From the scattered wreckage, a single object caught the dim light. A blue speckled egg, smoothed by the rain, slid free from the broken twigs. It nudged over the uneven ground, gathering momentum as it hit a slick incline. Pip watched, his claws digging into the dirt beneath his paws. The egg did not stop. It bounced once against a stone, changed direction, and began to roll toward the churning stream. The water had transformed into a brown, frothing torrent that clawed at the bank with hungry, repetitive pulses. Pip saw the egg approach the waterline. The current surged, a wall of liquid mud rising to meet the shell. It licked at the side of the egg, pulling it inches closer to the main flow. Pip tried to stand, but his limbs felt heavy, weighted down by a cold, numbing dread. His breath hitched, coming in ragged, shallow gasps that did nothing to clear his mind. He remained pressed against the rock, his back arched, his eyes locked on the fragile shell. The stream surged again, this time washing over the bank and swirling around the egg. The water was ready to claim it. He could only watch as the gap closed, the threat of the current now inches away from total destruction. A shadow detached itself from the gloom of the canopy. Professor Hoot landed on a low, bending branch just above the rock. The impact sent a shower of water droplets onto Pip, but he did not blink. The owl remained stationary, his head swiveling to lock his gaze directly onto the small creature below. Hoot did not hover. He did not offer any soft gestures. He simply shifted his weight, his talons gripping the wood tight as the wind whipped his wings. "True courage is doing what is right even when you are shaking," Hoot said, his voice cutting through the roar of the gale. The words landed with the weight of a physical blow. Pip looked up, his jaw set, his paws still trembling against the mud. Hoot did not wait for a response. He leaned forward, spread his wide wings, and pushed off into the gray abyss. He vanished into the swirling wind in a single, silent motion. The branch he had occupied snapped back into place, leaving Pip entirely alone. The stream roared louder than before, the sound vibrating through the ground beneath him. He was left with the silence of the owl's departure and the sight of the egg, now mere inches from the rising, churning water. The storm intensified, turning the sky into a bruised, swirling mass. A lightning bolt struck a birch tree nearby, the sound cracking like a whip across the forest floor. The vibration rattled the rock where Pip huddled, but he did not pull away. His gaze remained fixed on the blue speckled shell. The water had reached the final inch of soil, churning with mud and broken reeds. A heavy branch, swept along by the current, slammed into the bank and sent a spray of silt over the egg. It teetered on the edge of the drop-off. Pip felt his muscles locking, his chest heaving with every ragged breath. The cold seeped into his bones, yet the tremor in his hands began to slow. He dug his claws into the wet moss, finding purchase against the slick earth. He shifted his weight, pressing his heels into the mud, feeling the resistance of the ground. The wind pulled at him, a physical weight trying to pin him back, but he leaned into the gale. He adjusted his stance, his joints popping as he prepared to launch. Every fiber of his body tensed, ready to break the stillness. The water rose again, licking at the very bottom of the shell. He was no longer waiting. Pip exploded from the shelter of the rock. His paws found no stable ground. Sliding instantly on the saturated slope, he ignored the slip, driving his body forward with every ounce of strength. The wind fought him, a solid wall of force that threatened to flatten him against the mud. He saw the egg, a fragile point of color in the churning gray, teetering on the edge of the bank. A surge of water, thick with debris, rose up to meet the shore. He did not slow down. He threw himself into the path of the encroaching wave. The cold water hit his chest, knocking the breath from his lungs, but he reached out. His fingers closed around the smooth, speckled surface of the egg. The bank beneath him groaned and gave way. Mud and silt cascaded into the stream, pulling the ground out from under his feet. He scrambled, digging his claws into the shifting soil, feeling the current drag at his legs. He pulled his torso back onto the higher, firmer ground, his chest heaving with exertion. The egg remained shielded against his chest. He stood up, shaking the thick slurry from his fur, and turned toward the birch tree. He did not look back at the water that had nearly claimed them. Pip turned to the birch tree. It groaned in the gale, its trunk whipping back and forth like a lash. He pressed his front paws against the bark. It was saturated, slick as polished ice. He pushed, but his claws skidded, and he slid back into the mud. He growled, a low sound lost in the wind, and drove his claws deeper, finding a narrow fissure in the wood. He hauled his weight upward, 1 inch, then 2. The tree buckled under a sudden gust, swinging him outward. He clamped his limbs around the trunk, his chest pressed hard against the grain. Every fiber of his body screamed as the tree whipped to the left. He waited for the rebound, muscles coiled tight, then scrambled higher. The bark offered no easy purchase. He moved with agonizing slowness, testing each hold, his breath raspy and shallow. The wind screamed through the canopy, pulling at his fur and threatening to peel him from the wood. He climbed, his paws burning, his focus narrowed to the single, wet surface beneath his grip. He was halfway to the fork. The tree groaned again, a deep splintering sound, but he did not stop. The birch swayed violently, a pendulum of snapping wood and wet leaves. Pip clung to the trunk, his limbs trembling from the strain of holding his own weight against the gale. Every muscle in his shoulders burned with a sharp, white-hot fire. A sudden, vicious gust forced the tree to bow, nearly launching him into the gray void. He clamped his eyes shut, pressed his face into the rough bark, and held on as the wood buckled beneath him. The trunk groaned, a deep, resonant sound of impending failure. He forced his eyes open. The fork in the tree remained 10 feet above, a taunting, distant goal. His paws were numb, the skin raw from the constant friction. He reached for a higher knot, but his arm shook so violently, he nearly lost his purchase. He gritted his teeth, locking his core to stabilize against the violent motion. He swung his body into the rhythm of the wind, timing his movement to the tree's arc. He lunged upward, digging his claws into a fresh, wet patch of wood. He gasped, the air thin and cold, and hauled himself higher. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, rhythmic beat that matched the pounding of the storm. The fork of the birch tree loomed inches away. Pip pulled himself up, his paws sliding once more on the saturated wood. He dug his claws into the base of the nest, anchoring his body against a final, violent whip of the branch. The tree shuddered, sending a spray of freezing rain into his eyes. He blinked it away, his vision clearing just enough to see the hollow center of the wreckage. He shifted his grip, carefully maneuvering the egg from his chest. His paws were shaking, but he kept his focus on the center of the twigs. He placed the egg down, feeling the soft, damp lining of the nest yield beneath the weight. He let go. He did not pull away immediately. He watched as the mother robin descended from the swirling gray sky. Her wings beat once, twice, and then she folded them tight against her body, dropping directly into the hollow. She pressed her side against the shell, shielding it from the wind. The heat of her body radiated outward, hitting Pip's face. He let his grip on the branch loosen. The crushing pressure in his chest eased as he watched the egg settle into the safety of the nest. The mission was done. Pip descended the birch, his limbs heavy but moving with newfound rhythm. He slid down the last stretch of trunk, his feet planting firmly into the soft, wet moss at the base. Above, the bruised purple of the sky fractured. A beam of sunlight cut through the canopy, striking the raindrops still clinging to the leaves. They ignited, turning into scattered diamonds of light. The wind died as quickly as it had arrived, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the branches. His friends emerged from the shadows of the forest floor, their eyes fixed on him. Barnaby stepped forward, reaching out to tap Pip on the shoulder. Pip looked down at his own paws. They were crusted with dark mud and sticky sap, the evidence of his climb. He flexed his claws against the earth. The involuntary tremor that had plagued him since the first thunderclap was gone. He stood tall, his breathing deep and steady. He shifted his weight, testing his balance on the solid ground. He had faced the height, the gale, and the dark, and he remained standing. The forest was quiet now. He took a single, deliberate step forward, leaving his past hesitation in the mud behind him.